Sonny Dykes recently had some interesting comments on the future of college football. What did he say, and what does it mean for TCU? We'll talk about that next year on Lockdown Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, also on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Sonny Dykes, he spoke with Dave Campbell's Texas Football recently and had an interesting comment about the future of college football and where the sport stands. And it sort of coincides with some news that we saw recently from the Group of Five. So this is actually, you got to love the world of aggregation, where media websites, and I mean, I do this to a certain extent too. So I'm making fun of myself to a certain extent and others, but media websites will use content from someone else as their own content. So this is On3, the website, but they're taking a quote from Sonny Dykes from Dave Campbell's Texas Football. So Sonny was doing an interview with Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Mike Craven does a nice job over there reporting college football. And he said that eventually he feels like we're going to see a split between what we would call the Power Four conferences as currently constituted, and then the Group of Four, the Group of Five that are, I mean, below that has some negative connotations, but you guys understand what I mean. There's the Power Four of the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC, and then there's conferences like the American, the Sun Belt Conference USA that are also at the FBS level, but even in the new world of the playoff where there's supposed to be more access, you're not really seeing those teams break through, the Mountain West including that as well, break through and make it and excel in playoff situations. Cincinnati made it a few years ago before they moved on to the Big 12 and lost their first round game to Alabama. But Sonny Dykes said he feels like eventually there's going to be a split. The exact quote was, there's got to be a split eventually. There's such a big difference right now between the haves and have-nots, and I think we'll eventually split into two separate divisions. Alabama and Louisiana Tech are not playing the same sport. And so a lot of people took that comment and went crazy with it. And I thought this was a weird reaction to his words, but there was a prevailing thought of, well, how can Sonny Dykes say that considering what happened to TCU in the national championship game? And we all know what happened. They got destroyed by Georgia. Now, that was after winning a playoff game against Michigan. But I think that in some ways proves Sonny's point. Like, Sonny and the TCU coaching staff and all the players realized after that game, as good as that team was, and I think they could have played much better than they did that night. I don't feel like the score was indicative of the total gap between those two teams. I feel like there was a perfect storm at play that led to it. But bottom line is that, you are what your record says you are what the final score says you are, and that was a big loss on the biggest stage. But even though TCU had this incredible season in year one of the Sonny Dykes era, and they pulled off an outstanding upset against Michigan and ran through the Big 12 schedule undefeated, there was still a lot they had to do in the trenches from a physicality standpoint. They had to build up their depth to a better place, their talent level to a better place, to compete with the likes of Georgia, who at the time was the pinnacle of the sport. Now, Michigan is, but Georgia is still right there. They lost one game last year to Alabama in the SEC championship game. And then there's another huge drop-off when you talk about the Group of Four conferences. Louisiana Tech is the one that Sonny mentioned. I mean, Sonny coached there, so it's probably just on his mind. He understands the unique struggles and the challenges that come with coaching at a place like that. And it's even more magnified now with unequal revenue sharing and the transfer portal and all the different things that those coaches have to deal with. For instance, Spencer Danielson, who coaches Boise State, is the new coach at Boise State after Andy Avalos was let go and then took the defensive coordinator job here at TCU. He went on a rant yesterday. He made a bold statement at first where he said, listen, I'm going to change things up here, and I don't want freshmen making NIL money. I want them to earn these contracts and earn these endorsement opportunities by actually getting playing time and getting a spot on the team, having contributions on the team, and then we'll get into, hey, how much can you make? What's your marketability? which I don't think that's the best idea. I mean, I understand the sentiment that he's trying to get across to his team. I don't really feel like it's the best idea when you were talking about recruiting and team building. And then also he said that there were 11 guys on his roster that were actively being tampered with. So there were big programs across the country that were reaching out to them. Now, he didn't go on to say how that was being done. Speculate. I mean, when we speculate, we assume in a lot of these cases it's players reaching out to other players and saying, hey, if you ever want to come over here, there's a spot for you. And I'm sure to a certain extent that's directed by the coaching staff. But a lot of these schools that are good programs, I mean, Boise State's historically a really good program. They're being poached. Their talent's being poached by bigger programs after they find guys that can play at that level. And then they play well and they move on because they want the opportunity to play at the highest level. And so what does all this mean for TCU? Because whether it's the gap between the Big Ten, the SEC, and the Big 12, or it's the gap between the Power Four and the Group of Four, we're seeing more of these clearly drawn lines in college football. And there was some news earlier this week that the Group of 5 schools, Group of 4 schools, they're going to have their own top 25. They're going to have a separate top 25 because in theory, the playoff was supposed to give them more access to playing for a national championship. That has not materialized. The playoff committee has largely not respected that group of schools. Aside from Cincinnati, which I mentioned earlier, they haven't put them in the big games. And now even with the 12-team playoff that'll be coming in the next few years, there's already a lot of talk about, okay, how many teams are the Big Ten and the SEC going to get? Are we going to see more at-large teams from the Power Four conferences? Because even if you go 9-3, now there's an argument that you can play in the playoff because there's more spots available, right? Now, they're not talking about doing their own playoff yet, but they're talking about having their own top 25. And in part, it's a marketability move because it's like, hey, if Liberty's the number one team in the country in the Group of 4, Group of 5 conferences, and Boise State's number 5, and they play each other, which that wouldn't happen. But you get what I'm saying. They're trying to drum up some interest in these matchups. And I was talking with Paul Catalina on 365 Sports about this the other day. And I was like, this is, in some ways, this is a resignation to, I'm sure, something that they don't want to admit, which is that, hey, things have changed. And in a lot of ways, they're admitting what Sonny Dykes was talking about. They're saying, you know what? We can't really compete at that level anymore. Maybe on a neutral field in a one-game situation or Appalachian State can go on the road and knock somebody off, right? We see Fresno State, teams like that go on the road and win big games from time to time. But the talent level, the physicality, all those things, there's a much bigger disparity than there used to be. And so they're starting to kind of form their own coalition here. And I think eventually we'll probably move towards a place where they have their own championship. I don't know what it's going to be called. I don't know how it's all going to shake out, but that's just my assessment. The key for TCU and for the Big 12 in general, as we continue to discuss the options and different things that could happen in the next decade or so with conference TV contracts and super leagues and super conferences, which we're really already there with that part of it, super conferences at least. TCU's got to keep winning and they've got to stay relevant in this discussion because I don't know what everybody's individual interest is as far as where you want TCU to be and where you want them to play. I like being in the Big 12 because there's a lot of cool regional rivalries. A lot of my family went to Baylor. I know some of you recoil when you hear that. I totally get it. But so that's always a fun game for me, right? I have a lot of friends that went to Texas Tech. It's always a fun game for me. Texas was a great matchup. That's leaving now. But you get the picture. I have coworkers that went to Oklahoma State. That's usually one that I circle on the calendar each year. It's fun to have those interactions. It's fun to have that regional vibe to these conferences. So I like that aspect of it. I also want TCU to compete on the highest level because selfishly, I just want that. But also, I think TCU has proven through the years that they can do it. They have a commitment to athletics and a commitment to the football program that would allow them to do it. And they can hang if they're given the opportunity. So you got to keep winning, because the only way that you can stay in this discussion is if you win at a high level and the Big 12 continues to stay stable and they at least have some contact and a good working relationship with the Big 10 and the SEC. Or if there's ever expansion again, you get invited to the next tier up. But what Sonny Dykes said here was not out of line. I mean, it's not what Louisiana Tech fans want to hear, I'm sure, but it's also not wrong. I mean, these conferences are kind of leaned into it at this point with a top 25 of their own. And I was talking to Paul about this yesterday. I was like, honestly, if they really wanted to lean into it, they could have their own championship game, and they wouldn't do this. But they could call it the futures game, because a lot of the guys that would be playing in it would be players that you would see at big-time schools the next year, right? Like Daquan Finn at Toledo, who ended up going to Baylor. Eric McAllister at Boise State, and going to TCU. There's a long list every year now of guys that play at these different schools and have great seasons, have great production, and then they use that to launch themselves into a bigger program. And I know that not everybody likes that, and I totally understand why that's frustrating as a fan, because it's hard to keep up with who everybody is and who's on the roster now and where did this guy come from. But it's just the reality of the situation. So it's an unfortunate reality in some ways, but I think Sonny's totally right. I feel like eventually we're working towards a place where we're going to see the Power Four break away, and the challenge and the hope for the Big 12 with Brett Yormark is that they can hold on and stay in that power pack when and if those things come to fruition. When we come back, TCU basketball, they added a guard to the mix, and it kind of came out of nowhere. Jamie Dixon doing some work in the portal. It's been quiet as of late, but they do have a commitment. We'll talk about that next year on Lockdown Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. I want to mention our friends at Yahoo Finance. If you're a great investor, every great investor starts with Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all your investment and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. Let's get straight to the point. If you want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising cost of inflation, pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom, with Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to reach that financial freedom. When it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all you can. Now take it to the next level with those investments by using what every great financial person uses, Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor, whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance. Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data that you need, and they give it to you in one place. Behind every great investor is Yahoo Finance. They're a proud sponsor here of the Locked On Network. So a commitment that seemingly kind of came out of nowhere for TCU basketball. It's been quiet lately. You know, they had a good little run. They added Frankie Collins. I'm talking about the men's team. They added Frankie Collins, point guard from Arizona State. They added Noah Reynolds from Green Bay, who's a really good shooter and someone I'm excited about this upcoming season for TCU. And so those were the guys at those guard positions that they plugged in. You got some young players like Isaiah Manning and Jace Posey who will be getting significant minutes next year as well. They had a visit from Trezarian White, who is a big-time target for him. He's a forward who averaged almost 20 points a game from UNC Wilmington last year, also 7 boards and about 2 assists per game. Shot 49% from the field, almost shot 40% from 3 last season. Again, a player that showed the ability to stretch the floor. I think they're trying to build shooting and scoring around Ernest Uday, who was a good defensive player for them last year. Didn't do a lot on offense besides, finish occasionally in pick and roll situations. Hopefully he has more in the bag this season as improved. But then on Wednesday, they got kind of an out of the blue commitment from a young player, R.J. Jones, who was a true freshman last year at Kansas State. Now, he played his high school ball at an academy in Utah, but he's originally from the Denton area and apparently knows some guys on the team pretty well. Is a DFW kid. Didn't play a ton last year for the Wildcats, but he was one of Jerome Tang's, I think he was Jerome Tang's first commit, actually, looking yesterday at kind of his history with Kansas State. And Jerome Tang is known as a really strong recruiter. I mean, that's what he does. He's doing work in the portal right now, too. Unfortunately, TCU has been on the short end of at least one commit, maybe more. We'll see kind of how the rest of this plays out. But getting to his numbers, he averaged 2.5 points a game last year, less than 1 rebound, less than 1 assist, 29% shooter. Pretty much all the attempts last season were from 3. He's known as a sharpshooter. That's what he does. He's supposed to come in, shoot the basketball. Those shooting percentage numbers don't jump off the page, but he wasn't somebody that played a ton of significant minutes last season. So I think that it's pretty misleading. At least in high school, he was a big-time knockdown shooter, catch-and-shoot type of guy. Can come off the bench and be instant offense for the Frogs next year, potentially. I saw that the word on him was he struggled defensively, which that's not atypical for a young player. Hopefully Jamie Dixon and the staff can get him to buy in more to that side of the ball. But I think this is a good pickup. It seems like a low-risk, high-reward type of take by TCU. And the great news is he's got multiple years of eligibility. So the Frogs have really made a living the last few seasons on taking transfers, and they've gotten multiple years from some of these guys. But in a lot of cases, taking veteran transfers who have maybe a couple years of eligibility left, but just have that playing experience and can come in right away and give you solid minutes. And RJ might end up being that dude. I mean, it could just be the fact that he was kind of in a log jam last year behind a good backcourt at K-State and didn't get a lot of playing time, or the fit wasn't exactly what he thought it was going to be. And hopefully he's ready to step in and play. But I think at the very least, this is a rotational guy for you. And I would imagine he's going to get some good minutes because that's what he's looking for. He's looking to play somewhere. But, pretty solid pickup. Again, I like the aspect of just having a young player that you can develop and start to get ingrained in what you want TCU basketball to be moving forward, and has some talent. So from a 4-star high school player who's now getting a fresh start at TCU after one season at K-State, 6'3", 190 pounds. So good size, shouldn't be bullied on the perimeter by longer wings, has that height that you want and the ability to shoot over people. RJ Jones, welcome to Fort Worth. Excited to have him part of the team with TCU basketball. The women, not much news there. I think they're still, recruiting and working on adding some players, but haven't heard a ton from that camp lately. And then the other name to watch for the men really is Tresarian White, the forward from UNC Wilmington. And maybe they add one more after that, but I think we're getting pretty close to having a fully formed roster. And once we get that, I'll kind of break down more like, all right, here's what this person's role is going to be in the offense this upcoming season. And we'll see, I think the style of play is going to be intriguing the next few years because Jamie really pivoted to more of a transition-heavy offense lately because of all the great athletes that they had. And I wonder if that changes a little bit now just because you got a different core group of players and you've got some young guys on the team that are pretty new to playing significant minutes, and it's been a while since they had that type of situation. I guess they did last year to a certain extent, but it was mainly transfers who had been at different programs for a long time before they got to TCU. So a good opportunity for this coaching staff to kind of put their imprint back on the team and form a culture again with guys that are young and looking to, buy into something. So we'll have to see who else they add over the next few weeks here as the portal kind of dwindles down and starts to come to a close, at least the news and everything that we're seeing from it. When we come back, we'll get to some audience reaction. Had some good questions about baseball, so we'll talk about that and more next. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. Before we get to that, though, I do need to mention our friends at FanDuel. Don't forget, you can always make your first bet a winning bet. If you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to customers, one $5 bet, win or lose, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. You don't even have to win. You just put a bet down, $5, get $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Also, the FanDuel app is super easy to use. NBA playoffs going on right now, NHL playoffs as well. Stars take on the Avs. Mavs take on the Thunder tonight. Both teams trying to avoid going down 0-2 in those series. So huge, pivotal games. They also have, parlays and individual player props that you can bet on. Major League Baseball in full swing as well. So there's those games available to you every night. FanDuel.com/lockedon or the FanDuel app. One $5 bet gets you $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel, official betting partner of the NBA and a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. So usually in segment 3, we get to some audience reaction, just some YouTube comments, things that you guys are throwing out there. You can always tweet at me too, at SimcockSteven. The show is at Locked On TCU. If you want to get in touch with me that way, that's a good way to do it as well. But yesterday I talked about a new frog who joined the team. Really, I guess 2 players. But the most recent, Austin Jordan, the corner from Texas. And Tanner McKinney said, I'm really liking all the players TCU is picking up. They're getting what they need in players that can be a starter or a backup. Yeah, I like the approach they've taken here on the spring portal. Really practical, just guys that fit in the rotation. So James Brockermeyer, who can play center or guard and should fit in really well with that interior offensive line group and be able to play right away. Hakeem Ajigila from Houston, who played a lot this past season. Cool story, former walk-on from Katy, and made his way through the roster because of an injury. Got an opportunity, and that's Ajigilaya. I'm sorry, Hakeem Ajigilaya. I butchered his name that first time. I've been doing pretty good, but I guess I hadn't heard it in the last day or so. But Hakeem did a really nice job at Houston last season under Daniel Holgorsen. Got a lot of opportunities at nose guard spot. That prototypical size you want from a defensive tackle. And then Austin Jordan, a younger player who hasn't played a lot but was behind some really good folks at Texas, and now gets an opportunity to maybe play safety at TCU. So I think they're doing some really smart and calculated things in the portal. Richard Berry says he has one question about baseball. What are the scenarios to get them into the tournament? Sweep New Mexico State, take the series against West Virginia. The announcer said that was the most likely scenario. He said they showed some flashes this year, and he hopes they can improve going into next year. Yeah, so I think sweeping New Mexico State would be great. Now, I feel like if you drop one game, it's not the end of the world, but you want to sweep. And then take 2 out of 3 from West Virginia. I feel like that's the biggest aspect of this, because if you take 2 out of 3 from West Virginia, you stand at 15-15 in Big 12 play. And then that gives you a shot to – I feel like that gives you the best chance to get in the tournament. If you're under 500 in Big 12 play, it's a tough sell even with a really good record. They'll probably finish with 33 or 34 wins. And then winning one or 2 games in the Big 12 tournament would help as well. So making the Big 12 tournament will be the first step in that, but can't really do anything about that this weekend except watch the results around you. And I feel pretty good about their chances now that they – beat Baylor, swept Baylor over the weekend. It gives them a decided advantage over them. But yeah, that's the big key is take 2 out of 3 from West Virginia, sweep New Mexico State, and then I think if you do those things, as long as you don't just completely fall on your face in the Big 12 tournament, you should have a really good argument to make the postseason. And not the expectations that you had before the year. They got super hot last year. I would love to say I have that same optimism. One thing about this year's team, they are playing really well at the moment, and we'll see what they do over the next couple of weeks. They haven't won a series against a team in the Big 12 with a winning record. So that's one thing that kind of gives me pause with their chances, not to make the tournament, but how far they could go if they get in. But you have to get in the party first. And if you get there, then you have an opportunity to go do it. And so we'll see what they can do. And that starts with hopefully a strong performance against New Mexico State this weekend. This has been Locked On Horned Frogs. We'll be back tomorrow. It's your team every day.